Hello and welcome to Life Beyond the Numbers, the podcast for people who are curious about how to have a more fulfilling work life. We live in a world largely driven by numbers, logic and reason. But how we feel at work and about our work impacts us, our organisations and society. There is a relationship between the numbers of our organisations and the life beyond the numbers. I'm Susan Michrillon, your host. I've lived and worked in many countries. I've met people who love what they do and people who don't, people who bring their full selves to work and people who won't. But one thing that I've learned that is common to us all is that we are all unique and have unique experiences. And it's helpful to know that there are others who think like we do, or have had struggles too, or have gone where we want to go, or can show us things we didn't know. So join me and my guests as we place a lens on the human side of work life by sharing insights, stories, and strategies to inspire you to let your uniqueness shine through. Hello and welcome to episode 149 of Life Beyond the Numbers. This episode is going out on Saturday, October 28th, and is the second episode in October. If you listen to episode 148, you might remember that I mentioned I would only put out episodes every second week throughout October and November. And this is the second episode on Saturday the 28th. In this episode, I speak to James Perry. James and I covered a whole host of different topics throughout this conversation. And I think we came back around a couple of times to things like success, fairness and self-awareness, as well as connection and storytelling. I hope you enjoy. Well, today I am delighted to speak with James Perry. A long overdue conversation, I think, but we're finally here, James. Welcome to Life Beyond the Numbers.
Thank you very much, Susan, for having me. Pleasure to be here.
And James is sitting in this, you can't see the room because we're not showing the video, but he's got this beautiful room behind him where there's light shining even. And what's going on outside?
Middle of the storm, yeah. Storm Agnes is hitting Ireland as we speak.
So you are in the eye of the storm there, James.
You should have seen how calm it was this morning. It's incredible. And now all hell's breaking loose outside. So I apologise for any rain or anything, any sort of sound effects in the background.
I'm sure we'll be fine. We'll be fine. One of the things I think it must have been the TEDx talk that you did, and congratulations on doing a TEDx talk, and we'll put a link in the show notes if anyone would like to listen. But I think what was driving that was ordinary people can do extraordinary things. Okay. And I love that because I think we all have stories. And because we're human, we learn from other stories. So maybe you tell us some of the ordinary people in your life and the extraordinary things that have happened.
Funny enough, just to bring that in terms of stories, a fellow accountant on LinkedIn last week put a video up of him walking through a graveyard, through a cemetery. And I went, Toby, do you have some Irish DNA in you? Because there's a fascination for Irish people and graveyards. Would you have a fascination for graveyards?
Yes. Everywhere I travel, I go to see them.
But that's because of our fascination with stories. Graveyards are full of stories. So the number of times you walk along and there's so-and-so and there's that boy and there's that boy. Coincidentally, I then put that comment up on his LinkedIn post. And he went, yeah, James, my grandparents were Irish. I went, well, you've never told me that before. So, yeah, there is a love of story there. And I think in this part of the world especially, I think we're gifted on this island in terms of stories in Ireland. And the very first ordinary person who was brilliant at it was my dad. My dad was an inherently fantastic storyteller. You know, one of those wee men, Susan, that knows a wee bit about nearly everything. That was him, right? I was one of 15 children.
Wow.
Born during the war, had to leave school at 14. There was no sign of further education with him. It just wasn't possible back then because he had to go out to work to bring money back to the house to feed the rest of the other children that were being born by my granny. My granny was 88 whenever she died, and she lived by herself until she was 86, and she had 15 children.
Whoa.
Different breed back then. But my dad was a fantastic storyteller in terms of, you name the topic, he would have said a small fact. And I brought him up on the TED Talk very predominantly. One thing that really had a chord with me last week was I've been back in my travels again. So I was in Copenhagen and Sweden 2 weeks ago. I was in Milan last week. And the one thing I miss is if I ever went home and I says, right, I'm back from my travels. And he went, oh, how did you get on, son? And then would have told me a fact about the place I was at. And it's just that level of knowledge and story about everything. So he was definitely the first person that sprung to mind whenever you're talking about storytellers. And funny enough, I said to a cousin of mine last night that as every day goes past, I think I'm turning more and more into my dad. And her response was, well, that's not a bad thing, James, is it? And I went, definitely not. So if you have that art of storytelling, it makes it much more relatable. And I think maybe that's where sometimes I get a small bit of success on LinkedIn, is because I can tell stories about how I've experienced things in the profession or traveling or life or linking all that sort of stuff together. So yeah, that's the first person that comes to mind with storytelling is my dad.
And storytelling and accountancy, James, how do they go together?
I'll rewind ever so slightly. I qualified with Grant Thornton in 2006, and I was put onto the fast track very, very early on, very quickly. So I was promoted very, very quick. So by the age of 27, I was associate director. They said, look, there's a partnership space for you if you so want. But one of the reasons why they said they fast tracked me was because apparently I was brilliant with clients. And the reason why I was brilliant with clients was that I had the crack or had stories with clients. If it was a 20-minute conversation, I have 15 minutes of cracking stories and 5 minutes business. So I turned things on its head in that way. And apparently that's the reason my clients love me. I talked about their holidays. I talked about their children. I told them about my latest travels, etc., etc. And I found out I could get much more information out of them that way as an auditor. In terms of influencing people, if you can be relatable and have a story to tell that shares that experience that someone can tie into, that's what influence is all about. And I think we are not bean counters that sit behind computers anymore, that knock out spreadsheets. Maybe some people do, but in order to progress in the profession, I think we need to become more storyteller and conversationalists, without a doubt.
I don't see that on the curriculum.
No, that's the reason my university have got me involved, and that's the reason why I've got my career coaching program on the go. Because it is that, how many people actually want to sit down and watch death by PowerPoint anymore? If you're in industry or if you're in practice serving a client, you're not going to produce a 27 slide deck. You know what I mean? So how you convey the message that they want to know in the most quickest and most relatable manner possible, that's something that people need to think about.
Yeah, and I think at the beginning you talked about fact versus story. And I guess in a way there is that the numbers, I mean, for me, numbers are always telling a story. It's like, what story are they telling? And if you can't tell that story, then how can anyone understand the facts that are being presented? And I think there's often a disconnect in workplaces about understanding that story. People want the facts, they want the numbers, but they don't always understand them.
Especially people who have zero finance background. And finance obviously is the eyes and ears of a business. And if you can't communicate that to the other stakeholders, whether it be sales, whether it be marketing, it be ops, whether it be higher up the food chain into the board of directors, that's going to be tough. If you just send them a P&L or if you send them some analysis of whatever, it's meaningless unless there's an analysis behind it or unless there's a story behind it. So no, I completely understand that one. And how do people, well, funny, talk about some of our chat before we started to record here. You know, folks, go to Toastmasters, understand how you communicate. And I will contradict myself here. Maybe I do have more right-sided brain than I ever give myself credit for because of my conversational style. Maybe I do. I've got this funny mix. Do you know those disc profiles?
Yes.
The personality profiles. I've always got the split personality. I'm the only one in the room, typically, that's the red and the blue, or whatever it is. It's the analytical on one side and the people empath on the other side. And I've got that crazy mix. And sometimes that's actually the sweet spot. And the profession is changing. I think accountancy is changing. I think the world of work is changing. This cutthroat, ruthless, win at all costs is now starting to go. People don't tolerate that nonsense anymore. I don't think.
Really though, James, I'm going to pull you up on that one, because the stories that we see with businesses and everything, I know there's a world where things are changing, but there's also a world where things don't seem to be changing. So in Europe, if we just take Europe, at the moment, something like 13% of people, so 1 in every 10 people, you could say, are engaged at work. So that means 9 out of 10 aren't. Does that come down to this ruthlessness and this?
So I'll pose my statement a different way. Does it need to change? Maybe that's the thing. So do we need to go from being ruthless to being more relatable, to having engaged employees? I know there are issues at the minute with young qualified accountants in the profession, and that the great resignation is happening in accountancy professions. Why? Because other firms, big multinationals, can come across and go, right, you can work online, you don't have to come into the office anymore, and so therefore we can pay you a Dublin or a Belfast salary and you can still live at home. That is wrecking especially provincial small firms. So what is the other 80 to 90% that you need to do in order to retain your staff? That's another question. So maybe I will flip that back and go, okay, do you need to soften? Do you need to become more relatable? Do you need to have that empathy with your staff? That's maybe a question that people listening to this need to think about.
And do they? Because
why they need to listen to this.
because I if you think about going to work in organizations and how you've done your best work in your career, let's just take ourselves. If I look back, the times, I mean, I would have a strong work ethic anyway, but the times I'm going to go over and above, it's when I feel that the person who I'm working with or for has my back.
Absolutely.
Supports me, challenges me as well, but in a way that I can learn and grow, gets my curiosity going, and actually cares for me as a person. And much like what you said about being with clients, James.
Yeah, and it's funny, I'll have a couple of wee bits in that. The best person I've ever worked for, believe it or not, I was financial controller of that lovely blue drink, WKD, right? And apologies for anybody who drinks it out there. Have you ever seen it being made? I'm telling you. Anyway, my boss there was, this is a massive shout out to him. He was the best technical accountant I've ever met, best commercially, best people person, best in Excel, you name it. He was fantastic. But I left after 2 years. Whenever I handed him a notice, he nearly dropped. He really nearly dropped. And he turned and he said, "Did I burn you out, James?" I'm like, "Yes, you did." But he was fantastic, and he was very much back me up. We had a great rapport in terms of I could turn around and said, "Would you F off and leave me alone?" That's the good rapport we had. And there was that where, believe it or not, the next job I went to was completely the opposite. I only lasted there 5 months, and it was a long 5 months because my new boss didn't speak to me for the first 7 weeks. Apparently this was the test, right? And the first time she communicated to me was she shouted at me across from the printer to the desk at me. And the next day she sent me 21 emails while sitting in her office so I could look at her. That's the other side of the coin. That was ridiculous. And that's because, as you quite rightly said, she didn't have my back at all, and she was willing to throw me under the bus and I was gone within 5 months. Then moving into my own business and starting my own business, I've always been good at what I've done because of that work ethic, because I was very conscientious and all that. But now to what I enjoy most, which is helping young ones or younger members of the profession getting through, or maybe slightly older members of the profession coming through, and giving that guidance and just my experience of it. And as I said about university, I'm an associate lecturer in the University of Ulster. I love helping the students as well. Those students who can be bothered, like, because half of them at the minute can't be bothered. But I really, really love helping them in terms of whenever that penny drops and they go, yeah, this now makes sense. That's huge job satisfaction. And literally just saying, yeah, this is what I did do, and don't make that mistake that I did. So no, I completely get it. I completely get it in terms of if you can demonstrate to someone that you have their back and you're a fair person. I think that's all sometimes you need to ask for, isn't it?
It is. And that's really interesting because in the research I've been doing for the book that I'm writing, the thing that keeps coming up is fairness. That people feel like once they're treated fairly, that actually that makes a huge difference. But what is fairness, James? And is my version of fairness going to be the same as yours?
What a question. My concept of fairness is that if you do something wrong, and I would always be one, if I'd done something wrong, I'd put my hands up and go, look, I'd done that wrong. So rather than being judge, jury, and executioner, that the person goes, okay, I understand that. How are we going to change this? And I might help you. Rather than being blamed and being the scapegoat and all that, that's what I think's fair. If that person's going, okay, you haven't had that bit of training, or you're just maybe a wee bit experienced in that area, let me help you to get to that standard. Now, and then I think it's fair game if you make them stay twice, then you can get done. You know what I mean? But if that person's willing to just take a bit of time and help you out, I think that's fairness, to give you a fair crack of the whip, rather than you're being judged 24/7 or you're being micromanaged 24/7. That's not fair at all because you're not being given a chance.
This is the thing, isn't it? It comes down to really basic human ways of being in the world. We haven't even brought technology into this, you know what I mean? It's actually just about being a decent human being with another decent human being. So fairness comes from treating people like people and having manners and not setting unrealistic expectations and not overloading people with work and making time for them. All of these little, very little simple things that perhaps we think we can ignore, but we can't.
Have you ever met somebody that's completely different outside of work?
Oh, yeah.
Why? Again, as I said to you before, I'm turning into my dad. And one of my dad's greatest strengths, and I'm going to maybe put this in an non-PC way, but it didn't matter if you were the big man, high and mighty man, you've got the status, or, again, this is on PC, the village idiot. My dad treated them both the same. And I think I'm identical to that. I don't care about status. I don't care about ego. We're all the same. And maybe this is my human bit where we all come into this world the same way, and we are all going to leave this world the same way. So why would you be a different person inside of work and outside of work? I think that's all ego. It's conditioning. It's ego. And then once, and I think I told you before, I went through this dark night of the soul, once your ego falls apart and you become much more self-aware and go, right, this is what it's all about. Not only do you attract better people, but you become a better person and you become a better manager or you become a better leader in your work. But it's all that recognition of ego. And okay, I'm going to contradict myself where I'm saying the ruthlessness and et cetera, et cetera. That's where our profession struggles. There is still egos there. And maybe that's where it's tied in. But it's that self-awareness that I would encourage more people to think about. What makes you tick? How do you deal with other people? Even what you said, which is so right, and pet hate of mine. See, if you don't say your please and thank yous to me, I'll tell you. It's the wee young ones in university where they write one line and I will automatically write back, it's professional and it's polite to say please, hey, how you doing, and thank you. Please do that for future reference. I would say I send that to every student that doesn't do hello or thanks or whatever. It is those basics. You're absolutely right. It is that what I used to do to clients. You sit down to your member of staff and talk about their holiday for 10 minutes. And then you'd say, okay, this is what we need to do. Or the good old classic feedback sandwich. You know, that one, the positive and then the bad news and another bit of positive again. So that's the challenge I would maybe pose is have a bit of a self-awareness with yourself. If you believe you're different inside and outside of work, why is that? And maybe try and bring that human element into work.
It's such a great way of thinking about it, James. Are you the same person inside and outside of work? And look, people will say, oh, well, when I'm a parent or I'm I don't know, at Toastmasters or I'm that I'm going to be this different person. And I think we will shine different parts of our personality depending on the context. But absolutely, if you meet me anywhere, I would hope that you meet the same Susan and that you would recognize Susan in any context whatsoever. But I'd like to go back to self-awareness a little bit. And this is a question that I often ask people, so forgive me for asking this, but how do you know that you're self-aware?
I hope you're asking hard questions today. How do I know if I'm self-aware? I can feel my impact on others very quickly. I've always been like that. And it's maybe going back to me looking after myself the least. I will always put other people's feelings ahead of my own. And I will always have a very conscious thought, how am I making that other person feel? That's always been to my detriment occasionally, because then I sometimes don't stand up and be counted. And I hate difficult conversations. So that's where I'm self-aware, where I go, how am I impacting that other person? I'm changing my tact and self-awareness where I need to now understand. I've done a bit of work in this and then I let it slip. And I'm getting back into the world of me, myself. I have a bad back. So last week I was with a massage therapist. We were talking about things. And she went, James, you're very analytical, aren't you? Very boom, 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 factual. I went, yes, I am. And she said, James, have you ever felt inside your own body? I went, I know what you mean, but I am very cerebral a lot. But then her thing was, James, instead of going, I'm a massive, like I used to do powerlifting. And she went, don't go and do weights for a while. That is very logical. You're going to do 3 sets of 12. You're going to beat your personal best. What I want you to do is go for a walk in the woods and in nature and understand what you're feeling inside. So it's a different type of self-awareness that I'm now touching and feeling into, is what's awareness of me. So not only have I been very good at being self-aware of my impact on others, I'm actually very good at reading people as well. So I can tell people like that pretty well. But what's the self-awareness within me now? So that's my development in terms of all that. And for any Irishmen out there who are listening to that, trying to admit that is a big thing too. But I went through, like I've said to you before, I went through that very dramatically. It's called the Dark Night of the Soul. That all kicked off 2015, 2016, where I had a big breakup from a relationship. I had a very unique upbringing in terms of being an only child and circumstances at home. I know I'm going off tangent here, Susan, but here, the very strict Irish Catholic upbringing, coming from the north of Ireland, which we had a conflict for 40 years. So your identity was Irish Catholicism, Gaelic football, all that sort of stuff. And I was living this conditioned life. So I really wasn't particularly self-aware. Even in work, I wasn't. And the one thing I do want to say about and apologies if you can hear Storm Agnes now in the background. The one thing that I was, as a young manager, a very different person than I was outside because of stress. I wasn't coached as a young manager. I was promoted probably too soon. So therefore, yes, I do understand having those two Jekyll and Hyde personas. But going back to that dark night of the soul, it cracked me right open. And I mean right open, where I had to say to myself, what's actually going on here? Because I didn't have a clue what was going on. It cracked me open. I went into what people would say, you're going into the spiral of despair. I came out the other end and went, it was actually a breakthrough of 18 months. And that's where my self-awareness started to really develop, because I had to. Susan, if you mentioned the word psychology to me in 2015, early 2015, I would have said that's fluffy BS. That's nonsense. I don't care about any of that, because I'm logical, I'm analytical, I'm an accountant, my head works like a spreadsheet. And once those tabs start to delete, you have to go and think about, okay, what's actually happening here? That's a very long-winded way to understand where my self-awareness came from.
It's not at all. Like it's your answer, okay? So it actually doesn't really matter. It does matter because it's an amazingly rich and important answer. So I like to understand how you made a very clear distinction between say 2015 and post 2015. So you can see that as a manager or earlier on in your career, you did not have what we would say was self-awareness of yourself in a workplace. You were conscious of things and you probably treated people well and all of that stuff, but the psychology or the behavior side of things was fluffy BS, as you said.
Probably because I never got coached.
Yeah.
So I never got coached or mentored or anything like that. I was literally thrown to the wolves. I qualified in 2006, early 2008. I was associate director, like madness. And it was, there you go. There's your portfolio of clients. There's your work in progress. There's your billing targets. And you've got targets to get work in as well. And that was all at the age of about 28. And I had no coaching. Now, the partners in the firm were very big advocates for me, whatever else. But they were old school. And they were, right, you sink or swim here. And I swum for about another 5 years. And then I had to move on. So maybe there was that element of conditioning in that. And this maybe is a trait of mine as well. For as much as I am self-aware, even now, a thing I have to work on, I don't suffer fools gladly either. So I do have this wee streak in me that's maybe still harking back from that period of time, whereas you sink or swim and that's it. So there was that bit of conditioning, and that was old James, as I always relate to myself. But how did you, James, come through after that dark night of the soul? And things I would say to the listeners as well. You're the average of the 5 people you hang about with the most. No doubt about it. So get a look at that circle and don't even think about in work. Think about outside of work. Because if that influences you as a person, hopefully you can bring that better person into the world of work. I changed and I met a couple of people that changed my life. Definitely did. And encouraged me to. And then the other thing was I started my own business, which was a lifesaver. And I literally mean that. That was a lifesaver because I now had a wee project to get my teeth stuck into. And I never, ever thought I'd have a business in my life. I never ever did. And then what I done was, Susan, I experimented. I actually was honest with myself and went, yes, I am interested in so many other things rather than like what we do here in the north of Ireland is you go to the pub on a Friday night and you don't leave. Whereas I'm slightly more different than that. I am massive into history and culture. I went on a course on the chakra system. There were 12 women and me. I loved that. But then I exposed myself to different things. So that's where self-awareness actually started to come through as well. So those are the things. Surround yourself with good people. If you're curious about doing a course on something, don't care what everybody thinks. Go and do it or go and experiment on it. And if you've got an interest or a side hustle, do that 5 to 9 hours and build up something small. And you goodness knows where that takes you. I wouldn't be employed part-time by uni if I didn't have my own business, because that's what attracted them to me. I would say, actually, and maybe you'd say this, Susan, starting your own business is the best learning and development course you can ever take.
Undoubtedly, absolutely, undoubtedly. And it's the sink or swim.
Yeah.
It really is. And I love that analogy anyway, sink or swim. And if you think back then, James, to the partners that you talked about who said it is sink or swim here. This is what we did, so this is what you're going to do. What's the impact on them? Like, who had they become? Because, you could, in a way, you could say that they swam and you didn't, you drowned.
But they swam to their version of success, not my version of success. I'm now doing my version of success. So the green-eyed monster occasionally comes out in James on LinkedIn, where I see a couple of people in uni are partners, right, on X amount of money a year. But some of my friends as well, who are in very, very senior positions, see the fact that I done a day trip to Milan last Thursday. Right, I done a day trip. I live 20 miles south of Belfast. I drove to Dublin and I done a day trip to Milan. And at lunchtime, I took out my laptop and done an hour's work. And I went back and seen the San Siro Stadium. Who's more successful? You don't know. So I would say that's their version of success, which isn't my version of success. Very different. But I remember I used to go into senior management meetings. And the office managing partner in particular, was actually quite proud that he didn't see his children growing up, because that was a sacrifice to the profession. And I went, nah, this is crazy. This is like, you're missing the point here. And that's where I see my success now as achievements more than just money. That was where I sort of changed my mind.
It's fascinating, isn't it, how we can as well, I think, justify our take on life. And look, that person said what they said, but to say that you're sacrificing seeing your children growing up to the profession, it just sounds like
that's crazy.
For everyone, for the kids, for that person, for everyone that person came in contact with, because something was missing, or I don't know. It's not fair to judge either. We're not here to do that.
Absolutely not. No, and that's his thing, and that's fine. It's not my thing. And that's just the analogy behind it. But the opening line that I said in my TED talk was, and I changed it, I tweaked it ever so slightly to work for the talk. And it was, son, you're only on this planet for a wee trip. Go and make the most of it, right? My dad said that. But funny enough, he didn't actually say it to me. I just changed it for the TED Talk. So his younger brother, 18 years younger, our Colm came into the house here. Now, my dad was the last few months, so he probably only had about 4 months to go, and he was completely bedridden. But Jim being Jim, he was as happy as anything, singing and going on. And he used to have a wee tin whistle, and he used to blow it. Right, slave, come on and make me my breakfast. That was for me to make him his breakfast. A wee bit of wheaten and cheese. Sorry for people out there who don't know what wheaten is, but anyway. So our Colm came in and sat down, and he was just newly married. Our Colm got married at 59, right? Just newly married. I was going, he says, Jim, he says, I've seen a cheap deal to go to Spain. And my dad turned around and went, have you the time to go? I went, yes. Can you afford it? Yes. He said, Colm, you're only on this planet for a wee trip. Go and make the most of it. You could be lying here like me. And I'll never forget that. And that's where travel and meeting new people and doing podcasts like this and maybe getting a few clients and it's paying the bills, that's success to me. Maybe helping a few people, and I got people through their finals for Chartered Accountants Ireland there 2 weeks ago, and getting those wonderful messages of going, James, I'm now a fully qualified chartered accountant and I couldn't do it without you. That's huge success. So actually saying, right, I've made a bit of an impact in this world. Or doing that day trip to Milan. So again, that's something for people to think about. What is your version of success? Because you are only on this planet for a wee tiny trip.
Totally. And I think understanding your version of success is something that we're often maybe living somebody else's version of success because, like you say, the conditioning or whatever, and we're brought up in a certain way or we were influenced by certain people. So understanding your own can take actually quite a lot of effort as well. It's not something you might know immediately. And I think this is where you talk about something else, and that's that fusion of passion and purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very passionate now about doing these achievements for me. So travel's a huge thing for me. My 2 travel goals are to go to all 50 countries in Europe and to go to all 8 wonders of the world. And I'm nearly there with the wonders of the world. I've got another 25 countries to go in Europe. But that's because I like, Susan, I like doing things that not too many people on the planet have done. And I've done some crazy stuff. But again, it's just people to think, if you want to do that course, if you want to go and do... Now, I'm not going to be naive either. We do need to have money to survive. I'm not going to be naive and go, oh, you chuck in your job and you go for a world trip. I'm not saying that. I'm saying is just be balanced in your view of success. Social media is full of absolute nonsense regarding success in terms of you can get rich quick in 6 months, or you have to grind 24/7. If you want to grind 24/7, fair play to you. But if you don't want to do it, don't do it. You go and do what you want, what makes you feel comfortable. But it is getting that balance. Thankfully now I'm in a position where I can pay the bills and live. Like, I'm very lucky here. This is my great-grandfather's house. I own a 130-year-old cottage in a beautiful village here in the north of Ireland. And I'm very lucky in that respect. My mum, when I was born in the house, it's more than a house, it's a home to me. And it's mine. I'm very lucky. And I've got the consultancy and I've got the university sorted where I can get that standard of living that I want. But I'm not going to do it to the detriment of my life. You know what I mean? That's just but again, on the other side of the coin, I'm not going to preach to anybody about that either. Each to their own, but at least have an honest look at yourself about what you want.
And that word is key, I think, the honesty, isn't it? And it's something you mentioned already, being honest with yourself. And is it common for us, I know you can't speak for everyone, but I'm going to put this one out there, to be honest with ourselves, James?
It was very difficult for me to be honest with myself. Did I want to be a partner in Grant Thornton right down in my soul? No, it didn't. But was I going to give it a go? Yes, I was going to give it a go because, again, my old fella, my dad, who was a very wise man, mentioned about the what if factor. What if you don't give this a go, son? At least just give it a go. And I gave it a go and understood it, didn't like it. So, for example, my view of networking until 2015, 2016 was going into a room of people that I had absolutely nothing in common with a back pocket full of business cards, dealing them out like playing cards and walking out again because it wasn't my crowd. That was my whole thing then. So I wasn't honest. I wasn't honest with myself at all. I thought being on, 6-figure salary was what you done. You do an accountancy degree, you get a professional qualification, you go into the same firm for the rest of your life and you become partner. That's what I thought you done. But I wasn't being honest with myself. Did I enjoy it? No, I didn't. I didn't enjoy the late nights. I didn't enjoy the deadlines. I didn't enjoy the constant pressure. I didn't enjoy the 60-hour weeks. Absolutely not. Whereas now, I'm probably at the same level in terms of income that I was back then. Am I going to be a millionaire anymore? Probably not. Don't get me wrong, I would love $1 million, but not to the detriment of my own well-being. So that's the thing. And it's for people to be content. Maybe it's back to that word contentment that we mentioned before, or I mentioned to you before. Being content with where you're at. Because social media in today's world is that you can't be content because you've always something else to strive for. And we're never going to get to that point, or the vast majority of us. Even if you're a partner, you're going to strive to get the next million and then the next million. What's the point? If somebody's listening to this and wants to give me $1 million, I'll survive on that for the rest of my life. Thanks very much.
You say that now with the cost of electricity and gas.
Well, I'll invest $500,000 and live in the other half. Don't worry. I'm an accountant.
Investments aren't safe anymore, James. The world is very unstable. But yeah, like there's a lot in there, and taking an honest look at ourselves. And I think even if we talk back to the workplace, the role we play, I think that's something about fairness as well, that actually taking an honest look at how you contributed to a situation that blows up or isn't working. It's often easier to cast that shadow or net outwards rather than taking a look at yourself. And I think that's something that took me a long time to understand, that maybe I was playing a role in the fact that things weren't working out the way they were meant to be in my own mind.
The unfairest thing that I ever done in work, especially when I was a young manager, not delegate. And looking back on it, that was my biggest hope of them all. So I had, maybe it was a challenge set for me, I had the most challenging technical portfolio of clients in the entire office at the age of 28. And I always had the opinion, right, all the hard stuff I'll do because at least I'll know it'll be right. Right. And I don't want to be standing in the dock, so I'll do this stuff myself. But I wasn't fair to my members of staff, the younger members of staff. Well, they were just about 2 years younger than me. I wasn't fair to them because they didn't have an opportunity to prove themselves to me or learn. And I wasn't fair to myself because it was probably my own reasoning is the reason I was doing 60 hours a week, because I was taking so much more work on board that I shouldn't have done. So was I unfair whenever I was a young manager? Absolutely unfair to not only staff, but to myself, without a doubt. So yeah, delegation is a huge thing. And maybe that's part of our personality, is it's hard for us to let go because we're quite logical, analytical, slightly controlling in many ways, maybe a slight bit of OCD.
And that also comes back to, I think, James, what you said about, 28 is very young to take on that level of responsibility. And without a proper mentor or guide or coach to help you see you needed to be fair to yourself and so on. One of the first episodes I recorded was this phrase I picked up, which I absolutely love. It was a guy called Jerry Harris, and the episode is, I don't know, episode 8 or 9 or something. And he talked about appropriate selfishness. He said he was around in the world of work long before this work-life balance phrase. And one of his bosses told him that he needed to have appropriate selfishness.
Very interesting.
Isn't it? That actually the wheels would come off if he wasn't looking out for himself. And I thought it was a great way of thinking about things.
I might tag something onto that. Appropriate boundaries. So being a carer all my life, so I cared for my mum. So both me and my dad cared for mummy. God love her. She was very, very ill for many years. And then I had the pleasure and the honor of looking after her. And then I equally had an honor of looking after my dad as well. So I basically cared 42 years of my life. And I had no boundaries because of, right, I have to do this to make such and such happy, or need to do this, need to do that, need to do the other. And no boundaries for myself at all. So whenever I was I was in a sort of a group, it was a therapy session. So whenever I was in a group therapy session, we were talking about strong boundaries, and it just hit me like a ton of bricks. I've always let people, okay, there was stuff that I had to let the boundaries go. My dad was ill or whatever, but all the other stuff around that, if somebody rung me up at 12 o'clock at night after me caring for my dad all day and went, I need this, I would have went and done it rather than saying no. So it is those appropriate boundaries as well, which comes into that appropriate selfishness is a great term. And whenever someone talked about having that, especially I would absorb a lot of negative stuff from people because of the empath. I absorb it myself and it wrecks me energetically. So therefore I do need to be stronger in that. If someone is going off in one, And you say, hold on a minute, I can't absorb that. I have to go and do something else. So it is, and even in the world of work, if you're feeling that, again, that's back to the self-awareness piece. If you're coming and you're getting energetically really tired in work, there's something not right. And you have to sit back and go, what's going on? Is it me or is it the circumstances? And maybe having to try and change those circumstances by having a conversation with a line manager or a member of staff or whatever. It's the thing I need to man up with myself, is those difficult conversations with people in order to maintain those boundaries. But that selfishness piece, that's fantastic. But it's not really selfishness either. It's maybe protecting yourself.
Absolutely. I think, and there's nothing wrong with being selfish anyway. We often approach things with this, it's either good or bad or right or wrong. And we sometimes disregard the word because it says selfish, and we've been brought up to say, don't be selfish. But actually, it's about protecting yourself, I think, which is a really good point, James. And like your dad said, you only have one trip. And who's going to look out for you if you don't?
And that's the other thing that I have had to learn dramatically in terms of how can you give from an empty cup? I had a bit of a blip during the summer. I paused the business for a couple of months because I needed to recharge and because I was just running on empty. I was doing everything, never had a boundary at all. And again, being self-aware, I know I'm very much of an all or nothing personality. So I'm very much, if I'm in it, I'm in a million miles an hour into whatever that may be. And a friend of mine in the summer just, would you ever wise up and actually slow down? So yeah, there is a bit of that in terms of self-awareness. The other thing as well, which is really interesting for people, if you want to think about self-awareness, is what was your childhood like up to 7 and then up to 14? Because those are the two watershed moments in your life, and what was going on then. Because I had to rewind and look back at all that there. Again, up to 2015, I'd be going, that's a load of nonsense, all that. But it's not. So if you're thinking back, is it called Gestalt therapy or something? You actually go back into your memory bank sort of thing. It's very, very useful, very powerful stuff, that. So that definitely helps aid self-awareness. Believe it or not, do you know how far I went back? I went back before I was born. I was 10 weeks premature and I was 2.5 pounds in weight.
Whoa.
Yeah. In fact, I'm not 2.5. I'm not 2.5 now. And yeah, so even going back to that, going, that makes sense. You know what I mean? And I was 4 months in an incubator before I was let out of hospital. And you're going, yeah, that makes sense in terms of my reactions to things. And so, yeah, I'm not saying for people to go back that far, but I did. In order to aid self-awareness of why things happen the way they go or why you respond in the way you do.
There are clues everywhere, and there are definitely in the childhood. And James, can't remember if I've asked you this before, but it's just coming up so strongly. It's the Camino. Have you walked the Camino?
Never done the Camino.
As you were talking about slowing down and all of that, the Camino. I've walked from Lisbon to Santiago.
Wow. Because alone, the physio last week that I was with that told me to go into the woods, done that, the full Camino by herself.
Yeah.
That's incredible, isn't it? Well, I've done a 200-mile walk in the Himalayas. Four mad Irish men going around the Himalayas. There were 2 Sherpas and us 4, and those 2 Sherpas got lessons for that 3 weeks. They've never encountered 4 boys like that before.
Or again, probably, James, or again.
Never again. But I love doing stuff. That's solace. So as I said, I went to Milan by myself, no problem at all. To have that small bit of time, I had a book on the plane. I done 1 hour of work in a coffee shop, and then I got my dinner and came home. If you want to do that, go and do it. If you want to go and walk the Camino by yourself, please go and do it. Okay, there's maybe a load of logistical things to sort, but don't just put that off to tomorrow. Honestly, don't. I came home from Milan on Thursday evening, and on Saturday morning, I was looking up where I'm going next. And also, maybe you can relate to this, sometimes the best company you can have is with yourself.
Absolutely. Have you come across David White?
No.
Oh yeah, so I'm going to send you some links after this. I think you might like the writings of David White.
Okay.
And he talks about that as we get older, how we start to prefer our own company.
Yeah. No, that makes. There's another book called The Possibility Exists, written by a fellow that I knew a few years ago called Owen Scollard. And he was brought up in the Irish Catholic tradition. He became an accountant. He ran his own business. He went through all these emotions of what happened in Ireland throughout it. And every single page, Susan, I could relate to something. So again, if a young Irishman out there listening to this, The Possibility Exists by Owen Scollard. It's absolutely mind-blowing. And it may help. The other one as well, I know I'm being slightly sexist with my book recommendations. The Highly Sensitive Man by Tom Falkenstein. And I listened to it on Audible and I roared in the car. Yes, that's me. Just again, because it made me think it's not just me. I'm not the only one who feels like this. There are boys writing books about this. You know, it is common. You're not okay. There's a small percentage of maybe sensitive, empathetic men like me, maybe a smaller percentage than the norm, but it's not just me. So if there's anybody who wants to become more self-aware, those two books are brilliant.
I love that. It's not just me. And it never is, James. And this is one of the reasons that I'd have these conversations with people and the podcast, because we're never alone. And we often think we are. And I think there's huge benefit in hearing other people speak and going, that happened to me, or I feel like that, or that's how I think.
It's again, I literally, whenever you were saying that, I'm thinking back to 2015, where I thought it was just me. Like, why is this happening to me? Why am I going through this? Why am I isolated like this? Why can't people understand what I'm going through? But I hadn't found my tribe at that stage.
That's such a good point. Yeah, I often felt it was just me with stuff and that I was going through this and no one else had ever gone through anything like this before.
Why does somebody else sail through life and I don't? So got that.
Yeah. And so, yeah, there's somebody out there. We have so many like relatives who aren't related because we can relate to them out there on the planet. And yeah, find your tribe, and you're never alone.
That's the big thing. So I met a fellow accountant in early 2016, and meeting him actually changed me. I had breakfast with him on Saturday morning in Newcastle, beautiful town here, beside the mountains of Mourne. So I had breakfast with this particular person, and meeting him, he owns a wee boutique accountancy practice here. It's a family-run practice. It's very successful, but I call him the king of networking, because he was the one that showed me that it's not the stuff that I was, Chartered Accountants Ireland networking events or Grant Thornton networking events, not that stuff that I didn't have anything in common with. There are entrepreneurial events, there are startup events, there are chakra courses out there, there are loads of other things. Go on to meetup.com, go on to Eventbrite, go on to these things and go and find something that really lights you up. Like someone said, lights you up like a Christmas tree. That's where personal growth is. And if you can take that personal growth and bring it into a professional setting, you will become a much better leader. I think I wrote a LinkedIn post about this about 2 weeks ago. I was in Copenhagen and I met a couple of fellow LinkedIn connections. And I just then wrote about how travel for me is like, I think I wrote, is like living a real life MBA, because of the things you encounter, how you grow. Bring a decent book with you, read that. The challenges of how do you get into Brussels from the airport, talking to people. I talked to this guy and he was a waiter. And again, this is maybe the art of me in rapport building. And I says, well, where are you from? Most people won't talk to their waiter. And I said, well, where are you from? And he said, I'm from Chechnya. And I went, oh, Grozny. And he couldn't believe that I knew the capital city of Chechnya. He couldn't do enough for me. Couldn't do enough for me. And then he started talking to me about Irish history. I go, what? He says, yeah, my best mate's from Dublin. So it's these things of you growing as a person. How many times do you talk to somebody in the supermarket? You probably don't. Again, maybe I'm taking life lessons from my dad. He could have talked to a crack in the wall. You know what I mean? He probably tried to as well. But that's the thing. When we go full circle here, that's the storytelling. That's the conversationalist. That's where growth comes from.
And it's the human connection, James. I mean, I think that's what sums all of that up. It's the human connection. And
right, Agnes is just making her way here big time now. Storm Agnes is going absolutely berserk outside.
Look, we've massively overrun anyway. And I knew that was going to happen. I said to my other half, I said, you know what? I bet you we will talk over, because I never usually do. But all I was going to say was, what was interesting was I was just on holidays, and when the waiter would come over, because I always talk to waiters, especially when I'm abroad, waitresses, and the waiter would come over and say, how are you? And blah, blah, blah. And then we would say, and how are you? And even that, he'd go, like, what? And I just think if you want the local food recommendations and the wine recommendations or anything, they are such a source of knowledge, and they will go out of their way because you'll build a rapport.
And I think that's maybe, I know you're a fluent Irish speaker and we were talking about this, that's built into our language. So Augusty Hain on how,
yeah,
that natural response from an Irish person comes from our language, I think. So I was at that therapy thing, that group therapy thing, and the facilitator, the psychotherapist, was a native Irish speaker from Gweedore in Donegal. And her description of things was out of this world, because she was harking back to the Irish language and then translating it into her head and being so expressive in English. Maybe that's an Irish language thing, that in terms of our automatic asking, well, how are you? I don't know. It's like our own expression. If you say hello to someone in Irish, your own expression is a blessing. Like, it's a blessing. So maybe that's where it comes from. I think that's very interesting as well. But just to tie that off, the next night I went back. See, I'm very fussy with food, right? So I go to these foreign places and I try and find the Hard Rock Cafe, because I know they're going to have chips and wings, right? So I'm back in the same day, and I said to the wee waitress, well, how are you? Where are you from? And she said, I'm from Albania. And I'm a bit of a nerd, so the capital is Tirana, and I would love to go. And I said, oh, Tirana. And again, I'm talking to her. She's doing an MBA in Brussels. And it's that rapport building, it's that conversational thing. And here's a challenge again to the listeners. If you don't do that, give it a try. There's a dare for you, or a challenge. Go and talk to someone that you bumped into, the person serving you in the shop, or the waiter at a restaurant, and build that art of conversation and carry that into work.
Absolutely. And connect with the human side of people, like you would like someone to do to you as well, I think.
But even whenever, that event, and again, I'm talking about Ireland again, but this is just, I think we do have a slight knack of this. Whenever we were sitting around that table at lunchtime, and all the Irish people converged on the one table.
I met James at an event in London in June, and I think we had the rowdiest table at lunchtime. We just seemed to gather people as we sat.
People from every corner of the island.
Yeah.
It was brilliant.
And Javid.
Javid was going, what's going on here? How do these people have just met, and yet it seems like they know each other intimately?
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. Right, James, I am going to call a halt to this conversation. I think you'll definitely be back again for another one, I would imagine. And thank you so much for your honesty and for taking some of those questions that I think many of us are curious about and don't want to ask those questions. So that's the other reason I like to ask them.
Thank you for asking hard questions.
You're welcome. It would be no fun if you came on here and you weren't put through your paces. But James, I'm sure people will want to connect with you after this. So what is the best way of connecting with you?
LinkedIn, without a shadow of a doubt. It's the only way to connect with me. Someone, nothing else. So no, definitely LinkedIn. If you want to contact me, go and search James Perry on LinkedIn, send me a DM, no problem at all, having a conversation, whether through DMs or Zoom preferably, and we'll have the crack, as we say here in Ireland.
Absolutely. And I think you have a YouTube channel as well, James, with some interviews with people on there.
If that's a wee sideline, you must have been hunting me out on that one. I used to do some, okay, there's the accountancy one, that will probably change. But as a sideline during COVID, I started to interview people randomly and used to host, actually done this slightly before COVID, used to host networking events as well. And it was under a brand called James Perry Presents, and then I just parked it. I interviewed a priest off Father Ted. I interviewed the #1 authority on Newgrange, the ancient burial chamber in Ireland. You name some of the personalities that you stumble across. Absolutely fantastic. Again, going back to the other conversation. I might restart that again.
There you go. And my dad wrote a poem about Newgrange that hangs in Newgrange.
No way.
Yeah. So I'm going to send you that as well, James. So I have a bunch of things to send you after this conversation.
You're not going to be meeting anybody this afternoon. You'll be sending me links.
I'm meeting my publisher in an hour, 45 minutes. So I really have to go. That sounds so good, doesn't it? James, thank you so much for the conversation and for allowing it to run over its normal course as well. I appreciate that. And
hopefully people will get something from it.
And even if they don't, I have. So thank you.
Very good. Brilliant.
All right, slán go fóill.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed the paths we traversed on today's episode. If something rang through for you, be sure to let me know. Or maybe you can share this with someone in your life who would benefit from listening too. And if you enjoy helping others, I'd be so grateful if you would leave a review, so that people who might also be curious about their own life beyond the numbers can discover this podcast too.